Okay, so this has been nothing short of crazy the last several weeks when it comes to the AI market. As you all are well aware, we heard of DeepSeek AI, how that dropped on the market and pretty much crashed the US market during that week. I will cover a little bit of some high level overview, how the company came to be. I'll talk about some of the timelines in terms of products that DeepSeek as a company released. We'll cover some of the concerns that industry folks have already talked about in terms of privacy and security. And then I'll get into a little bit about how to actually install DeepSeek locally on your own computer to test this out. And the first questions that comes to mind is why would you want to do that? Well, in terms of all the privacy concerns that they're talking about, if you didn't want to go through the app and so forth, we'll cover that when I get there. But for starters, let's take a look at kind of like how things, played out. So DeepSeek as a company was founded in 2023 in Hangzhou, China. And in November 2023, DeepSeek launched its DeepSeek Coder, an AI powered coding tool. In January 2024, it released its large language models to rival GPT-4, which was interesting in its own. And then in January 2025, DeepSeek actually launched its current version, what we consider DeepSeek R1, which is a free AI chatbot. We'll cover that in a second. On January 2027, DeepSeek surpassed ChatGPT in downloads, and this causes stir in the US. Like, I mean, total scare in terms of like the market. It Nvidia stock dropped about 18%, and most of the major AI players, such as Google and Facebook, and all of those big players in the AI industry, pretty much like lost big time in the market. I think Nvidia alone lost about $600 billion that day alone. Now, why does this matter? So, DeepSeek is interesting because it not only competed with some of the big names, or pretty much the big name, which is OpenAI's models, LLM models, but DeepSeek, according to the company, claims they only trained their model with like what about $6 million in comparison to what OpenAI and other major players train for hundreds and hundreds of millions. And one of the things that comes to mind is why does that even sound interesting, and why would that crash the market on that day? Well, for starters, most of the Chinese companies by US export laws are restricted from buying a lot of the high powered GPUs, which is the graphic units that we use in terms of AI to train our models and so forth. And they're claiming they use like even older versions of these GPUs to train their models. Now, there's been some disputes about whether that's true or that's not true. However, according to them, officially they claim they train their models for like just $6 million, which is, you know, turned like in turn compared to like the hundreds of millions that the US like big players train their LM models for. Now, that matters because a lot of investment has gone into the US market in terms of now we need to upgrade our power grids. Now we need to build more power plants. Now we need to build more sophisticated CPUs and good computers with processing power and all of that stuff. And a lot of investment has gone into that. So investors, as you're well aware, pretty much reacted to the fact that can we do this for less? And this is if you're trying to understand sort of why the market crashed, that's basically why. Because they're saying maybe we don't need to put this much money in, maybe we don't need to invest in this much infrastructure. But as I said, those numbers have been disputed, but for now, this is what we'll say because those are what they're saying officially. Now, let's talk a little bit about some of the privacy and national security concerns that people have raised. As when DeepSeek dropped onto the market, security researchers and AI researchers and so forth, pretty much as you expect, will be testing the system out. So a lot of things or some of the things that initial research found out, and this is in and this part that I'm about to say is specific to the app. So in terms of like the app, and the researchers discovered that it collects user data, including some of your chat logs and device metadata and so forth. And then the concern, as always, just like with say TikTok and others, is like, oh, your data has been sent to China. I mean, duh, it's a Chinese app. So that, in my opinion, is to be expected. But, we'll get to the part where I actually install this locally, sort of in a way to circumvent some of these things if you don't want to send your data to China and so forth. Now, the concerns is not necessarily about sending data to the Chinese companies, but also some of the concerns that researchers raised was regarding the fact that because it's a Chinese company, they're bound by Chinese laws, which means, sort of like, as they would say, or as people would say in the industry, Chinese communist laws. So there's a lot of things that we need to be concerned about and so forth. And unlike the US based AI companies, DeepSeek pretty much operates under Chinese control, as any Chinese company is expected to be. There's a couple of other concerns that people have talked about in terms of censorship and bias. Tests show that DeepSeek pretty much actively censors politically sensitive topics. Like you can talk about the Tiananmen Square, human rights in China. There's been criticisms of the Chinese government and so forth, and therefore, like, people are saying, or at least research so far has shown that DeepSeek tends to censor and filter these out as it is, right? Now, in comparison to TikTok's data control, like controversy, there's a lot of concerns that has also been raised in terms of like the data policies and so forth. So the U.S. government, as always, or as usual, is considering probably even do we ban DeepSeek as well because of some of the security concerns? Is DeepSeek going to face similar scrutiny? What I would say, though, however, is we have been talking about this as industry folks, insecurity, whether in terms of regulating AI and so forth. I don't know. These might bring out some of those, conversations again. Now, I do want to touch on something very important. What I do find interesting as we talk about these censorship and biases and so forth is DeepSeek, unlike OpenAI, pretty much when it came out, open source. I mean, they open sourced the damn thing. So, what what is interesting about that also is for it to be the number one competitor as it is as of the time it was released to the AI leader, which is like OpenAI in terms of LLMs, and then to open source it. I mean, for me, that's was almost like a big punch in the gut. But anyway, we can debate that philosophically another day. Anyway, so I do want to also cover some of the jailbreaking and security risks that AI researchers have mentioned when it comes to DeepSeek. There's been a lot of hackers that have played or take tried to kind of see how can we manipulate responses and so forth. A lot of AI jailbreaking. And then we'll ask the question, what is AI jailbreaking? It's pretty much like when we try to manipulate like the responses or override censorship or extract hidden data from the AI models itself. There was actually an incident involving DeepSeek where researchers were able to find exposed databases and data potentially that could be like damning in terms of like DeepSeek users and so forth. So yeah, so there's been a lot of attempts in terms of trying to jailbreak DeepSeek. Many have been successful in regards to some of the things that has been tried against DeepSeek as compared to like well-tested models like OpenAI and so forth. Now, another security risk or concern that has been mentioned is OpenAI and Microsoft are actually continuing to investigate whether DeepSeek stole their intellectual property. They're trying to figure out if there's some kind of intellectual property violations there. You remember I talked about that $6 million in terms of training. What some researchers and some industry folks are saying is, yeah, they could probably train it for that less because a lot of the heavy lifting has already been done by, say, OpenAI and Microsoft and so forth. So even if they trained it for that much, that could be the reason why that is so. Why is AI jailbreaking dangerous? Well, I mean, it's dangerous because it can actually be weaponized for misinformation. It can be weaponized for hacking. It can be weaponized for fraud. People can generate like biased or misleading information. But however, open source models are easier to reverse engineer and exploit. So, you can play with that as far as that is concerned. Because it is open source, you do have access to some of the source code. You do have access to the source code, and you can go look at this at any time you want. So in terms of what's happening right now, at a high level, the US is considering whether it should ban DeepSeek within the United States, just like we have been talking about in terms of similar bans like TikTok and so forth. OpenAI and Microsoft definitely do see DeepSeek as a competitor to their AI dominance, including many of the other players such as Google and Perplexity and Facebook and so forth. And we can definitely say that the open source AI models are really actually challenging the closed source and proprietary models such as OpenAI's models. And then we definitely can also say that the global AI's arms race has just started, and China is certainly making its play in that market. So, the big picture, AI is no longer just a Silicon Valley thing. It's a worldwide competition right now that's pretty much open to the market for anyone for grabs. DeepSeek has shown that AI innovation is on the rise, certainly. And at the same time, as innovation is rising, certainly they come with some security risk and concerns and so forth. At a high level, we can talk about the fact that, open source models are certainly challenging the proprietary AI models. And then for the US, as always, we can talk about national security concerns and so forth. But as I mentioned, we're going to get into the live demo session and we'll cover things when we get there. I'll I'll talk about a little bit about, what we need to do there. Now, that said, I'm going to show you a live demonstration, kind of like a quick overview of how to run this locally. And as I mentioned previously, the reason you would want to run this locally is when you go to, say, deepseek.com or whatever, and just like you go to chat.openai.com to use ChatGPT, remember that that's a web app, and a web app, they have servers that are either connected back to China and so forth and all that. What is being powered in the back end of that app is just the LLM model that we're going to install locally. So when I do this install, what I'm going to do is we'll cut off the internet just to make sure like nothing is seeping out of our computer and so forth. I'll actually be using a virtual machine to do this. So, it won't be, I can do that anytime I want. I'll just cut off the access to the internet and so forth just to see if it works fine without any issue. What I do want you to know as you try to set this up is you'll need a little bit of some system, hardware requirements that will make this work. Most likely you're probably running a Windows or Mac or Linux computer. I'm going to run this on a Windows virtual machine. You'll need something with similar setup, such as like a quad core CPU or higher, maybe 40 gigabyte disk, 16 gig RAM, and so forth, or maybe even a 15 gigabyte space will do as well too, depending on which of the models you download. So when I come back, I'll set up my virtual machine real quick and we'll just set this up. What we will be doing is we will be installing, Ollama, and then we'll kind of download, DeepSeek R1. We'll probably use like the least amount of space that we can use in terms of like the models, because some of them are really big, and they're big based on how much training or smarter they are. So for LLM models, anytime you see they say this is like 1 billion parameters, that just means it's a lot more parameters. So if I say it's only 30,000 parameters, it's probably not as smart. So the bigger the parameters, the smarter it is. So we'll take something in the middle just to see if it works. Now, I'm not going to be doing an actual AI testing just to see if it is really good, or doing some benchmark testing, but this is just to kind of show you how it works and so forth. So stay tuned. When I come back in about 8 seconds, we'll do this. I'll spin up my virtual machine or Windows box, and then we'll set this up. All right, I'll catch you in about 8 seconds. Okay, so we are in my virtual machine. Just so I can show you what it looks like, I'm just gonna click on settings here. As you notice, I allocated about 16 gigabytes to 16 gig of RAM to this. my actual computer's got like a ton of RAM. So I just, created this virtual machine and allocated that much RAM to it. I'm only just using two processors and I've given it like a 64 gigabyte hard drive just so we can, play with some of the reasonable size models. So I'm gonna close this out. So when you set this up, try to kind of target something. If you are like actually running this on your regular computer, you would want something sort of with this minimum requirements. But I'm running this obviously in a virtual machine, so it doesn't matter. I'm gonna destroy this once I'm done. I use this primarily for testing out. So how do we get this started? Well, a few things to note. This is kind of what the workflow will look like. We will download Ollama and then we'll download the DeepSeek R1 model. We'll choose like the size that works for us. Then once we're done, we'll kind of test it out a little bit. And then once we're done with that as well, what we'll do is go ahead and actually download OpenWebUI, which is sort of like um, what will give us the user interface to be able to interact with the model. But before we actually do download OpenWebUI, we'll install like a Docker container. And Docker containers, you're welcome to go look that up. It's just how we kind of containerize applications. We package them into something. We'll probably actually also be working with the installation of WSL, which is Windows Subsystem for Linux. This allows us to be able to run kind of native Linux apps within Windows without having to actually set up a virtual machine. So without further ado, let's start and I'll fire up Google Chrome and then we'll go to Ollama and start downloading things. So again, the reason you would want to run this locally are some of the concerns that we have talked about. Privacy concerns, security concerns, and all of those things. Some of the privacy concerns that we have seen are potentially your keystrokes being recorded if you're going through the app, or even if you're going through the app, your mobile phone data or information being sent or recorded somehow. If you're going through the web page or website itself, then we can talk about things like your IP addresses and location data. All of those things are potentially things that the app could collect if you're running it. But that said, if you're running this locally, you don't really need to worry about those in terms of like just being able to kind of circumvent, some of those concerns or minimize those concerns if you want to call it that. That said, let me just fire up Chrome and we'll get this started. So I'm gonna make this a little bigger and then I'm just gonna type Ollama and then we'll go to ollama.com and then you'll see the big button that says download. We're just gonna hit download. Since I'm on a Windows virtual machine, it will default to say download for Windows and it says requires Windows 10 or later. I'm just gonna hit download there. And as I watch this go kind of finish up, we'll just give it a couple of seconds and this should be done in about 3 seconds. Awesome. So this is all good. Let's see. This is done. Is it done? What's going on here? Almost there, almost there. Let me open it. Okay. Okay, there you go. Now it's done. So hit that. Just open that up. Let me make Chrome a little, minimize that. Now Ollama opens up. You hit install. Just let it install to the local. I mean, like I said, I'm running this on a virtual machine, so I'm just gonna destroy this once this is done. But this is just so we can kind of go through this for learning purposes. So let's give it a little bit. Let's see, taking its time. So Ollama is actually done installing. I'll just hit this task pane here, and you can see that logo down here. As I point down here, you can see Ollama there. So great. Now the next thing we do is go back to Ollama where we had opened up in Chrome, and I'm gonna do. In fact, I was gonna search DeepSeek R1, but it looks like this is so popular, it's already there. So I'm just gonna hit DeepSeek one, DeepSeek R1. And just to walk you through a few things, when I mentioned that when we do this local installs, you really need to worry about these sizes. So the biggest size, as you can see, to get DeepSeek R1 in terms of like its best of the best would be that 671 billion parameters. And if you see the lowest one is like 1.5 billion parameters, there's 7 billion parameters, at 8 billion and so forth. All of these, what it means is they're what it means in terms of sizing is they're like really huge files. Like this could be like maybe terabytes of data, and this could be about 3 gig or 4 gig. We'll open it up and then we'll see what it means. I'll select one of them. Now what I do want to talk about is what are the difference when we say parameters. What do they mean? The parameters are simply the things that was used to train that AI model. So the smaller the parameter, the less smart it is. So just as you can see, from 1.5 billion to 671 billion, this would be the smartest of them all, like in terms of computation and whatever. I think the difference between just the basic one here and 7B is that this one can do a little bit more coding better than this one. But just so you know, the smaller the parameters, the less smart that module is. But we're gonna kind of just pick something in the middle. I'll probably go with the 7B just to, kind of see how that works. But anyway, it already has kind of defaulted to that. But just so you can see what I was talking about, if I go 1.5 billion parameters, you can see that it's only 1.1 gigabytes. So that's kind of like the storage that it's going to use up on your hard drive. And the further we go up and up, 7 billion, you can see is about 4.7 gigabytes. 8 billion is about 4.9. 14 billion is about 9 gig. 32 billion parameters is about 20 gig of hard drive space. 70 billion is about 43 gig. And 671 billion parameters is about 404 gigabytes. Many people would kind of go, oh, I have a terabyte drive. I can run the 671 billion parameters. Don't be deceived. This will require so much power. I mean, this we're talking about DeepSeek level and Google level servers to run these parameters. So don't be deceived about just the size of the model in terms of what's going to get downloaded. You need some serious processing power. Like I like to say that as a joke. You need some NSA processing power to run a lot of these things. I mean, unless you're DeepSeek or Google or whatever. But anyway, so don't be fooled by the size of the model itself. But you need some serious processing power in terms of your computer to run these. So just be mindful of that. Okay, cool. So we are going to go with the 7 billion parameters, and then we're going to just go down. It actually tells you, just to kind of walk you through this, it tells you which ones you're going to copy if you're trying to run them. So we're going to look for, it says distilled models. These are just kind of like distilled down for people like us to be able to run it on our local machines. What we are going to do is copy one of the commands based on which of the parameters that we're going to choose and so forth. And then we're going to just go back into our command line and be able to run them. So give me a second and I'll open up command line and we'll get the right command that we need to copy, and then we'll put it in there. Okay, so I'm going to select the 7 billion parameters. And as you notice, if I select any one of those parameters, it tells me a different command, like what I'm going to cut and paste. They're really just the same command minus the parameters in the end. So if you notice, this one says 70 billion, R1 colon 70 billion. If I select 7B, it's going to give me the same thing, just 7B at the end. So I'm going to copy this. This command is what I'm going to copy, and then we're just going to run it in the command line just to kind of download all the manifest files and all of those things that we need to get this running locally. One more time, just to verify, I do have Ollama, just to make sure. So I'll hit start, and then I'll do CMD just to get command prompt going, and then I'll minimize this. Actually, wait, I didn't copy this. So let me grab this, copy that right now. And then what I'll do is just come into command prompt, right click and paste it, and then hit enter. And then as you can see, it says it's pulling down the manifest and everything. So it's doing its thing. We'll leave it for a little bit to run, depending on how fast your computer is and so forth. And download speeds, it might take you a little bit of time. If this is the first time you're running it, it might take a little bit of time as well. This is my first time running it actually on this virtual machine. So let's see how it handles it. So as you can see, it's downloading everything that it needs. We did see, if we go back here just to verify, remember how I talked about the amount of space we need? And you can see down here, the model says it's 4.7 gigabytes. So we come back to that, you can see that it actually pulled like 4.7 gigabytes. So yep, everything is all good. And you can see here, it says it's verified the digest, it's written the manifest, and everything was a success. And now, guess what? It's actually asking us to enter or send a message. So I'm just gonna say something basic like, "Who are you? Who are you?" And then what we should see is it's gonna do some thinking. As you see, it's saying it's doing thinking, and it says, "Greetings. I'm DeepSeek R1, an artificial intelligence assistant created by DeepSeek. I'm blah 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 blah. I'm at your service and would be delighted to assist you with any inquiries or tasks you may have." That's awesome. So at this point, this is all you need to do to run DeepSeek locally, and we are pretty much done with the first part. This is running, and you know you can pretty much send in whatever commands you want. So let's say, I don't know, give it something old and say hello world. You say hello world is thinking, it's probably gonna tell us something about that being like, the greetings we use as computer scientists and programming and so forth. But it responded. It said, "All right, the user greeted me with hello world. That's a friendly start. I need to respond in kind to match their tone." So I think this part is actually thinking, is doing the thinking part. But anyway, you get the sense of what we're trying to do here. So all of this part is thinking, it's doing its thinking, and then you notice it ends that, and then it says, "Hello, how can I assist you today?" And then yeah, so this is it pretty much in terms of getting DeepSeek to run locally on your computer, and you can test this out. This doesn't require any like serious computer skills or anything like that. Just follow the instructions I gave you, and this is straightforward and it's a straight shot. Now, what I do want to do is, most of us were used to seeing that, you know, nice and friendly UI. Like if I go to chat that open, like if I do chat GPT actually, and I go to chatgpt.com, we're used to this friendly, it's doing all this, whatever. Anyway, whatever, skip this. And I'm not gonna log in or anything. So hello world, I'll do the same thing here. Hello world. We're used to seeing, what I mean is we're used to seeing this friendly user interface. So what we're gonna do next is set up something that gives you this similar look, in case you're like such like you're not a power user and not so fancy of this command line here, or running things in command. So give me a second and we're gonna pull up some packages as I promised, and we'll get this running as usual. Before I do this, I'm actually going to go into Windows features and enable virtual machine services or support for that. Windows features. Sorry, my keyboard is like behind me, sort of, so it's kind of hard to look at this and do this. All right, so actually, I'm just going to put Hyper-V, which enables us to run virtual machines and so forth. And then I'm just going to enable virtual machine platform as well. The reason I'm doing this is because when we do actually set up Docker containers, which is ideally a Linux system or Linux based system, so what that does is enable like things like Windows WSL, which is Windows Subsystem for Linux. What that is in essence is it enables you to run Linux features pretty much natively on Windows without having to install a virtual machine and so forth. I'm just enabling these features because I think I may need them, but I'm not. I actually not sure. I don't think it should matter, but I'm just gonna do it just so we don't break anything and this works smoothly. So I do that. I hit OK. It's probably gonna ask me to probably reboot, but let's see. Hopefully this doesn't fail. Sometimes it acts weird, but let's see what it does. So searching for required files. Let's give it a second and then we'll see how that goes. Looks like it's applying the changes that we need. Let's give it maybe another 5 to 10 seconds and this should be done. Okay, so just as I mentioned, I suspect that it's gonna have me reboot. I'm just gonna close things out, just close things out, and then we'll reboot this machine and then take it from there again. So we are all rebooted. Let me just log into this and then we'll continue what we're doing. It's taking its time just a little bit. Okay, so we are logged in. What I'm gonna do is fire up Chrome again. Give it a second. Firing up Chrome. And this time, what we are going to do is actually search Docker. So Docker desktop. And something's going on there. And you'll see there's actually a couple of links that show up. So this will take you to the Docker site. What I do want is the get started because it takes you to sort of like the install and so forth. And then it tells you get started. We can kind of click that. Gives you, kind of like an overview, etc. Go back. And what I really want actually is docs.docker desktop. That's what I actually need. So let me make this bigger and it will say install Docker desktop. So I'm going to click on Windows because like I mentioned, I'm running this on a Windows virtual machine. So I'll click on Windows. And ideally what we're just going to do is sort of follow these instructions here and so forth. Docker, just to give you like just to give you kind of an overview of what this is. Just in the same way I'm running this virtual machine, containers are like almost like packaged virtual machines without going deep into the concepts, but these are like virtual machines that are packaged with just the things that you need to run a certain application or so forth and whatever. So they're also like a virtualized but more tiny. They only use up the resources that you need, and they are most of the time meant to do and run very specific tasks. So unlike my virtual machine, which is basically like a Windows machine, I can do everything with the operating system. Docker just runs all the things that you need in terms of packages and so forth. Hence why we're going to be using like the WSL subsystem, like Windows subsystem for Linux, which is what enables us to run like a Linux system within Windows with no issues. So I'm just going to download, I'm going to hit Docker for Docker desktop for Windows x86 64, and as I wait for it to download, should be done. It's almost there. And then once it's done, I'll click on it. Let me minimize Chrome for now so we can get that installed as well. And I'm just going to click yes. And this is going to start. It's verifying the package right now. And we'll kind of go through the quick install. If this is your first time, sometimes it'll take a little while. In fact, so as you notice, I've been talking about this for a while. It says use WSL2 instead of Hyper-V, and I definitely will use that. Hyper-V is also like a virtualization platform within Windows that allows you to run virtual machines, but we'll use WSL so we don't have to do a lot of the heavy lifting and so forth. So I'll just hit OK, and then it's downloading all. It's pretty much downloading all the packages and files that it needs. And once it's done, we'll kind of continue with our setup. Okay, so we are done. And as I suspected, it's going to close and restart. So I'm going to restart this and then we'll continue with that. So let me click restart. Close and restart. It's rebooting and then we'll come back when it's started. So we are back. We're back in our box. It's rebooted. And as you can see, there's Docker desktop. I'm going to fire that up. And then we'll continue with our setup. The next thing we're going to do is go to OpenWebUI, which is their user interface or graphical interface that allows us to run DeepSeek AI, the model that we installed, sort of like the way you would go to ChatGPT and get that user interface. So I'll just hit accept. We'll continue with the installation here. What if this is the first time you're setting up Docker desktop, you're gonna have to go through this. But I'm just gonna use the basic or recommended settings. I'll just go to finish. It may actually pop up something that asks me to download like the updates for WSL 2, but let's see if that happens or not. So I'm just gonna say yes. Do you want this app to make changes? Yes. And here we go. So it's gonna ask me for an email. Like I can skip all this. You don't need to enter or create an account here. So you just hit skip and then skip here as well too. And then what we can do, it says actually a new version available. We just downloaded this. That's weird. But anyway, so says it's up to date. Okay, I'll hit cancel here. And then it's just gonna start Docker. What happened there? So quit. Let's just do this. What I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna close this out and then reopen it. Sometimes it's kind of weird with the first installation, but let's see what happens. So this should be opening up. There you go. But what did I do wrong here? Let's see. Okay, so I may need to reboot this machine. Let's reboot that. Okay. Not sure what happened there, but something with WSL. So I'll do this and then I'll just do restart. Okay, so we are rebooted. And just a couple of things to note, and this was why I was getting those errors. So I'm running this in a virtual machine, and then WSL is pretty much a virtual machine within that virtual machine. So think of it as a nested virtual environment. And typically, for you to be able to do that, there's a couple more features and settings that you must enable. If you are on, like, for example, Hyper-V, you need to go into PowerShell and then enable access of this nested virtual machine to your virtual machine resources. And then in the same way, I'm running VMware Workstation Pro. So what I just did is, in fact, I just went in and under my settings, I just enabled that on the processor. I enabled that virtualization capability to support the nested virtualization environment. So hopefully this should work now. That's really why I think I was getting those errors. But let me just do a quick. Let's fire Docker back up and then see if everything works. But before I do that, I'm gonna open up command prompt again, and then what I'm gonna do is just run WSL and update, just because I made that change, just to make sure I'm running everything up to date. As you can see, it says everything is up to date. So what I'll do is close that out, and then I'm gonna fire up Docker Desktop. Once this fires up, we shouldn't have anything running yet. It should start up with no issues. Let's just see. Let's see if this works without any issues. It should. I don't expect any issues. There you go. So it's running. Let's you can see what RAM it's allocated for it. It says 1 GB. So far, what my CPU usage is, it's nothing, and so forth, and disk usage as well. Just the high level overview in Docker Desktop. This is sort of like a hub. We can see containers, we can see images, volumes, builds, and so forth. Containers will be primarily all the containers that we install to run, our specialized applications and so forth. So to walk you through the workflow again, we are going to go to OpenWebUI, which is the user interface that gives you that look and feel that you would get like with ChatGPT, or if you go to DeepSeek AI itself's website, that gives you that user interface that you see where you can interact with the application sort of like you would on the web application. So let me minimize this. I'll open up Chrome, and then what we're gonna do is go to docs.openwebui.com, and I'm just gonna, as you can, if you once you land on this page, you kind of see like the quick start, and it'll tell you quick start with Docker. It'll tell you if you're running Ollama and so forth. It gives you options for if you do have GPU and would like to utilize that GPU for processing. I do have a GPU on this machine, but I'm not gonna do that eventually when we get there. I'm just gonna run this with the basic command because we're just trying to run this just basic, just to give you an idea of how this works. So getting started, what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna click getting started, quick start guide, and because Docker is the most kind of common one that most people run, so you'll see it's already selected by default. What we are going to do is just follow the steps, pretty much like step 1 and 2. What we're gonna do is we're gonna pull the OpenWebUI image, which is the container from the container registry, and then what we're gonna do is actually run the container. Once we do and we come back to Docker, you'll see that there will be containers here, which is primarily the application that's running OpenWebUI to give us that user interface that we want. So let me just grab that first command. What I'll do is just copy here and then I'll minimize that. I'll minimize that as well. I'll open up command prompt again and then we'll just paste that in there and then we'll let it do its thing. So I'm going to hit enter and we should be pulling the packages. So it might take a little bit, but let's see. I'll just give it a couple of seconds and see what happens. Okay, so it looks like that was done. It says it downloaded the newest image. There are no errors. We see everything is successful. So that's great. So the next thing is we're going to go back to our web browser and then we're going to grab the second command. So as I mentioned, you could either run this with your GPU enabled or like if you had an NVIDIA GPU. I do have one in the system, but I'm not going to run it as I mentioned. So I'm just going to run this with the basic commands and basic settings. So if you see step 2, it says run the container with default settings. This command includes a volume mapping to ensure persistent blah, blah, blah. I'm just going to grab that and then I'm going to go minimize that and go back to the command prompt, right click that, and then I'm going to hit enter and then we'll wait for it to do its thing as well too. So and then it wants us to allow, so I'm going to say yep, allow that. You'll see the same prompt, you should allow it, and now we are good. So if we go back to Docker, we should see a container actually running now, and we do see our container running. As you can see, it says running here. You see that green button, and then over here it tells us what image we're running. I'm just going to open it up a little bit. Actually, let me just make it a little bigger. So it tells us what image we're running here. And then in the port, you can see what ports it's running on, localhost 3000. If I click this little icon here, it should open up in the web browser so we can actually see what our UI looks like. So let's go ahead and open it up and then we can check it out for the first time. So I click that. And as you can see, we are good. We're up and running. But because this is the first time I'm setting this up, so I'm just going to have to click that get started. For the first time when you set this up, it'll ask you to enter your email or full name or whatever, stuff like that, just to create an admin account. So I'm just going to let me create that and then I'll come back right now. Okay, so I've created the admin account. I'll just hit create admin account and close that out and we are good to go. So look at that. Let me minimize that. I'll send this down and I'll make this a little bigger. So as you can see, we have very similar like UX, like you would see like in ChatGPT. If you click here, you'll see your chats. I'm just gonna do something like a hello world, so you'll see that. Hello. Let me do that. Who are you again? Who are you? And this time I'm doing it in the UX. So you notice it looks very similar to that ChatGPT UI that you would see. And mind you, all of this, as we've been doing, is running locally on your computer. It's not doing anything. You're not on DeepSeek's website or anything like that. You're running all of this locally. These grayed out lines is just, it's doing its thinking right now. And then it's likely going to give us the answer once it's done. But you can see very similar UI. You see your chats are on this left side. And then you'll see like your settings and so forth and all of that, whatever. So this is running quite slow. It says it's thinking. It's still thinking, but let's see what it says. So, but anyway, so as far as like our goal here, this is pretty much done. Like this is we've set up the LLM locally. We've run it. We tested it in the command line. Now we just installed like OpenWebUI, and then we're running it like with the front end, like with a web UI that pretty much looks just like ChatGPT will look. There are a few things that I do want to kind of highlight. The goal here, as I mentioned, is running these locally gives you the power to prevent things from leaking out, like your IP address and so forth, and all of those things that many people are concerned about, running this on DeepSeek's actual website because they can record your finger. I mean, sorry, your keyboard presses and so forth, and all of those keystrokes and all of that. So, but anyway, running this locally gives you the ability to do that. So as you can see, it's starting to respond. It says, "Greetings, I'm DeepSeek AI, blah 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 blah." Now let me see if we can do this briefly, just because of some of the concerns. So I'm gonna do this. This, as you can see, this is my network card here. I'm gonna go in here, right click that. Let me just go to network. So now I think it's eating up this virtual machine's RAM. That's what it is. So let me just kind of do this. I will close this for now. Anyway, so remember, there you go. Okay, perfect. So let's do this. Now it's really eating up my RAM. That's what it's doing because it's like within the virtual machine. So let me do this. I'm clicking it, but it's not working. Anyway, but this is how you would set it up. This is how you would set up DeepSeek on your local machine. What I was trying to do here was something more fun. I was trying to fire up Wireshark. Maybe I'll do another video on that just so I can give this like a much larger RAM and hard drive space and so forth. What I was really trying to do was fire up Wireshark to kind of capture the traffic to see what IP addresses and things or where the traffic is going, and that way you could see that if you run this locally, like it's not talking to anything, it's just talking to everything that's locally on your computer. Yeah, this is definitely eating up my RAM right now, so everything is running slowly. But anyway, so if you run this on their own site, you're definitely likely to have that issue of like, their servers recording your IP addresses and so forth. But you run this locally and you shouldn't have that problem. Anyway, so thank you for staying with me. I always enjoy these kinds of videos, especially when we kind of get our hands dirty and try things out. I'm bummed out that it started to kind of act out, which actually was great because it showed you what I was talking about in terms of if you're running these models, you really need some super like really good processing power and so forth. As you notice in the end, the virtual machine was kind of like taking a shit. But anyway, so what I did want to do, what I was hoping I could do was to set this up, like open up Wireshark and just look at the network traffic and see where things are going. And the reason I wanted to do this was because a lot of folks heard like, I keep seeing a lot of posts and blogs about, yeah, like, oh my God, it's sending like data to Chinese servers and IPs and so forth. I mean, it's a Chinese app. I don't know what else you expected or what else folks expected, but I would have loved to fire up Wireshark, check out the local traffic, and then check out their actual web traffic that they use on their website that a lot of people are used to, or even the app from the app itself. But anyway, we'll maybe save that for another time. And thank you for staying with me, and I'll catch you guys later. Bye.